Cops of Reddit, what famous people have you pulled over and how did it go down? My dad pulled over Clint Eastwood. I guess this was just after they started requiring licenses to drive motorcycles in California. He pulled him over because he was driving squirrely, like he didn't really know how to ride. His response to license issue was, "Man, next thing you know you'll need a license to ride a horse." My father was a police officer for 27 years, and in one day he pulled over Paul Newman, who, apparently, was notorious for speeding. So, my dad goes to cite him and gets a call for an accident that needed assistance down the road. Then sometime shortly thereafter, my father pulled him over again and Newman allegedly groaned, "Not you again." Not a police officer, but I was a NYC park ranger in Central Park. I asked Christiana Manpour from CNN to put her dog on a leash and she said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "I don't care who you are, put your dog on a leash." Not a cop, but I was working as a lifeguard and we had the beach red flagged, "No swimming, for rough surf." There was this girl swimming, so I hopped on my ATV and headed down to call her out of the water. Her swimming was weird. I couldn't put my finger on it right away. Part of determining whether or not I have to rescue someone is to evaluate their swimming stroke. She wasn't in obvious distress, just swimming around in her weird sort of way. I blow my whistle to get her attention and she starts swimming back to shore. At this point I should probably mention that we had a surf contest going on and there were a bunch of pro surfers in town because of it. She walks out the water and at this point I realize why her swim stroke was weird. She only has one arm. Now I've got to tell Bethany Hamilton that the water is too rough for swimming. Not a police officer, but I've never pulled over a famous person. I gave Werner Herzog a speeding ticket in the Hollywood Hills in the early 2010s. He was very polite and even shook my hand. Nice fellow. I used to live in Bergenfield, New Jersey a few years back, and I think Chris Rock lives there. Or Englewood, somewhere in Bergen County. My buddy was a teenage cop and said he pulled him over for going 55 in a 30 and NJ is mad strict with driving. He said Chris was awesome and even gave him an autograph after the speeding ticket. Some police officer pulled over Kit Harington once for speeding or something. He said he'd let him go if he told him if he's really dead in Game of Thrones. He told him. He let him go. True story, at least according to Kit. Former police cadet and dispatcher here. I was on a ride-along and was told this story. So this officer pulls this car over for speeding. She then suspects the driver of being drunk. She calls in his driver's license to run it. The dispatcher tells her, "You have Nick Nolte pulled over? Do you know who he is? He's a movie star." The officer is young and doesn't know who Nick Nolte is. Turns out he wasn't drunk, he was just being Nick Nolte. She gave him a warning and sent him on his way. I once saw a cop pull over Chuck Norris. As he was in a good mood, Chuck Norris let the cop off with a warning. My coworker wrote Wes Craven a ticket. He didn't know who he was, and so when he gave him the ticket, he just was like, "Here's your ticket, Mr. Craven." My coworker told me that if he knew he wrote a ticket to the Nightmare on Elm Street guy, he would have issued a warning instead. My coworker is also from Kosovo, so when he tells it with his accent it's extra funny. I'm not a cop, but when I was in school one of the school cops was watching our class for a little while, and he decided to tell us about some chick he arrested a few nights earlier. He arrested some lady for drunk driving, and she kept screaming at him to look her up and that she's famous. He looked up her name, and it turns out she was on The Voice. He watched the video on YouTube of her singing terribly and being an ass to the judges. He arrested her and found out she was wanted in Louisiana, so he had her sent all the way from San Angelo, Texas to bumfuck nowhere, Louisiana. Moral of the story, shut up, you're not famous. My dad was a cop. Pulled over none other than Marilyn Manson for an unsafe signal lane change. He was bragging the day it happened, in the early 2000s. Said he was nondescript and low-key, apologetic and didn't act like a big shot above the law. My friend's dad arrested 669 in. I wasn't a patrol officer, but rather the sheriff's deputy at Aspen's Airport, Sadi Field. I had to threaten to tow both Kurt Russell's and Hunter Thompson's vehicles more than once when they left them where they weren't supposed to, parked right in front of the airport. Hunter was Hunter and just mumbled and groused, and Kurt usually just waved and smiled. Dirty violators, the both of them smile. I can still remember Russell's license plate. VCD 711. So, from the comments here we can conclude that not many police officers use Reddit. My father-in-law was a police officer for many years and often regales the story of how, during a routine traffic stop, he met the great Kid Duncan. When I was a cop I pulled Blake Shelton over once. I walked up the window, went through my little spiel, hello my name is Officer Juskvin with the city police, the reason I've stopped you tonight is insert crime, may I see your license and insurance verification. He gives me his stuff and it's really late so I haven't even figured out it's him yet. I'm just thinking this guy looks familiar. He was really friendly and pretty apologetic, super nice guy. I wanted to ask for an autograph or picture but felt like it would have been unprofessional. D'Angelo Russell. He was respectful and didn't mention who he was. I didn't know it was him till I recognized his name and looked him up. I let him go with a warning on some chicken shit window tint traffic stop. Once a member of parliament were detained and put to jail for being too wasted. After an hour this MP told me that he or she wants to get out but I refused since he or she were still too drunk. Then MP said to me, don't you know who I am? And I answered yes, but don't you know as a lawmaker that it applies to everyone? And slammed MP's cell door. He or she got pretty pissed but surprisingly didn't file any complaints against me. Typos. Of course I'm not a police officer, but NASCAR driver Kurt Busch was pulled over once. He tried the don't you know who I am routine. It didn't work. For what it's worth he's a lot less stuck up nowadays. My dad ran into Bo Jackson emerging from a patch of woods in camouflage carrying a bow, possibly poaching/trespassing, right outside his gated community in a woods. Burridge, Illinois. They just chatted about the large local buck they both apparently knew of, for a few minutes and parted ways. Personally, also cop, I never dealt with anyone famous. Unless you count the kids of the Chicago Bears radio broadcaster, Jeff Joniak. I gave the long-haired guy, early 2000s I believe, from Hootie and the Blowfish a ticket for no leash on his dog. We were driving on a small beach island and he's standing on a side road with his dog and no leash. He told my partner and I he was in a band and we asked which band he was in and he told us. We both were like we've never heard of this band, lying. I said Hootie? Good luck with that, is it rap? And he laughed and said no. He was cool. Still gave him the ticket. Not exactly what you're looking for but relatable. My father was a repo man for a short time in Newark, New Jersey. He ended up getting a call to put a car on the hook for unpaid bills. As he put the car on the hook a man started running out to the street shouting, "Hey man. That's my car. Don't you know who I am?" My father had no idea. The man then proceeded to tell my father that he's Redman. My father responded, "Yeah. Well, I'm white man, next time pay your bill," and drove off with the car. My dad is a retired NYPD cop. Many years ago he pulls over a limo in Brooklyn speeding on highway zooming towards Manhattan. Driver pulls over and admits to speeding and begs my dad not to look in back. He naturally looks in back and there is Johnny Mathis and another guy stark naked going at it. Johnny Mathis begs him not to say anything and my dad says no prob. When he returns to precinct, there is an envelope there for him. 2 front row tickets to see him perform at the old Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center. He goes with his fiancée, now my mom, and I was born 9 months later. Thanks Johnny, if it wasn't for him, I might not even be here. Former police officer here. I was on patrol when I saw a group of people trying to cross the street on a very busy and dangerous 4-lane highway in the dark. I pulled over and loaded them up and drove them across. It was the band, till Tuesday. Nice people. Only local politicians. They've all been assholes and expected me to just let them go regardless of why I stopped them. Some got warnings, some got tickets, one got arrested because she was drunk. I treated them just like I treat everyone else. Some of my co-workers got pissed about the arrest because she was on the county council and they vote on our pay raises, but DUI is DUI. I'd rather piss off a council member and miss out on a raise than let some drunk go and find out later they hit and killed someone. Cop here, we wouldn't really be able to tell you any stories, at least in the UK, due to data protection. Not a police officer and not famous, but I was so high once that I drove by a cop standing by his car. He waved to me and I pulled myself over thinking he was flagging me down. I met and spoke with a lot of celebrities when I was a cop, as our jurisdiction covered a prominent nightlife spot and casino. Never pulled one over, but met quite a few. The most memorable was Rick Ross. I had a racist old piece of shit lieutenant. We were in the middle of an initiative to ID and otherwise remove a growing presence of 9th bloods. This meant approaching a lot of black, and white, and Hispanic, but this story was specifically about a black individual, so I only have one example. Apparently I must explain things like this because offended by everything and twist facts. I know nothing about type of people, individuals if they met the general description: sagging pants, face tats, Cincy Reds hat, the area band bandanas, and they started using the red hats to fly their colors. We would ID them, tell them they were not welcome dressed the way they were, so they could pull up their pants, take off the hat, and stay, or they could leave entirely. My partner and I recognized Rick Ross. He was with someone, and they were just enjoying a frozen cocktail. My LT comes up and tells us we need to ID those two blacks. We're not about that, we tell him we know who that is. He's a successful rapper. We're not gonna harass him. Long story short, we were ordered and did as ordered, but I made it no secret to him while asking for his ID that we knew who he was, we enjoyed some of his music, and that we didn't want to harass him, but the one racist fart made us ID him. He was cool about it, with my partner and I still feel bad about having to harass him like that. Dude was legit just chilling. He said duck that place and left immediately after. Smug-ass LT came by smiling that he knew there was something wrong with the motherfucker. He had 8k in his pockets, you ain't shit to him lol. Edit to add some clarification because people take half provided information to turn it into their own agenda. I have the same name as someone famous. When I get pulled over by the cops it doesn't help me any. The fact I look nothing like them and live in a different county doesn't help.